Well, it's 3 o'clock, so we can go ahead and get started. For the participants in the out in space, there is a group chat going on to your right, and if you're having an issue trying to find it, it's at the bottom. If you hover over the bottom of the screen, you'll see a chat box with a bubble, and if you click on that, you'll be able to monitor and put your questions for Dr. Yell within the chat. And we'll get started with, as we said, as more people enter, they will be a part of the discussion. But at any time, Ambra and Jen, you're ready to get started.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Amber Green, and I, along with my colleague Jen McKenzie, will be facilitating today's keynote speaker series. We want to begin by welcoming all attendees. Thank you all for joining us. The keynote speaker series was created to provide our membership and practitioners at large with the unique access to lead researchers and seminal scholars in the field through focused study of key articles, video presentations, and extended interactions and conversations. This live discussion was one way to enable those unable to attend the conference to engage in enhanced and focused discussions with leading scholars. Over half participants are full or part-time university faculty. We have 5 doctoral students and 9 full-time professors. States represented in this discussion include Missouri, Texas, South Carolina, Florida, and Colorado.
Okay, so Ambra and I are going to serve as the discussion facilitators. Dr. Yell is going to begin with a short introduction, and then Ambra and I will take turns addressing questions for Dr. Yell. While the participants will not be able to ask questions directly, you can provide questions in the chat box, and then our moderators, Dr. Kathy Thomas and Dr. Suzanne James, will, as time permits, break in with additional questions that you have.
Introduction to our guest speaker, Dr. Mitch Yell. Dr. Yell is the Fred and Frances Lester Palmetto Chair of Teacher Education and Professor in Special Education in the College of Education at the University of South Carolina in Columbia, South Carolina. Prior to coming to the University of South Carolina, Dr. Yell was a special education teacher in Minnesota for 16 years. During his time there, he taught in elementary, middle, and secondary classrooms for students with mild intellectual disabilities, learning disabilities, and emotional and behavioral disorders, and autism. He received his PhD from the University of Minnesota in 1992. His professional interests include special education law, evidence-based interventions for children and youth with disabilities, progress monitoring, and classroom management. For the past 26 years, Dr. Yell has conducted extensive research on legal issues in special education. His primary goal has been to extrapolate principles from legislation and litigation, communicate them to parents, teachers, and administrators in a clear, non-legal manner, and to assist school districts in the formation of legally sound, research-based policies. He has published over 100 journal articles, 4 textbooks, 24 chapters, and has conducted numerous workshops on many aspects of special education law. Join me in welcoming Dr. Yell. Dr. Yell, would you like to give a brief welcome and hello to everyone?
Yes, thank you for joining us. I'm certainly glad to be here and looking forward to the next hour or so that we have. I would just like to say I have a real easy email and I will be on the chat however long we're going to be doing that. I'll be answering questions on the chat. And if anybody would have any questions for me, it's myell@sc.edu. And I'll be happy to answer any queries or questions you have. So thanks for being here.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so we're going to jump right into our discussion questions. So the previous introduction of you detailed a vast array of professional experiences, but what other insights can you offer about your areas of scholarship, teaching, or service?
Well, much of my work is really, I think, informed by my many years that I was a teacher in the public schools. I was in Minnesota, a teacher in actually Anoka, Minnesota for 16 years. And primarily at the time when I started teaching, which was right after the passage of what we then called the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, or PL 94-142. In Minnesota, we did not have a category of emotional disabilities, which have been primarily involved with, but we had a category called Special Learning and Behavior Problems, or SLBP. And the 16 years I spent in teaching, actually it was 12 years teaching. I went back for 4 years and got a PhD, and then another 4 years teaching. And that informed a lot of what I've done. I was actually in my second year of teaching in Minnesota in a a resource room for youngsters with special learning and behavior problems. And for my second year of teaching, I went to the Minnesota Council for Exceptional Children meeting, which was held in downtown Minneapolis. Is a large convention. And I happened to go to a presentation by a fellow named Stan Dino, a young professor at the University of Minnesota. And at the time I was teaching, I remember being more mildly dissatisfied with how we measured academic growth in students. At the time, I remember the school district in which I was teaching had us do pre-tests, teach all year long, and then do a post-test, giving the same test again, which was, in our case, the wide range achievement test. And so it didn't take me long to figure out that if I tested at the beginning of the year and I tested at the end of the year and there was no growth, that it was a year gone that the student couldn't really afford. So I remember looking at the brochure, and Stan Dino and his doctoral student by the name of Phyllis Merkin were putting on a session on what they call database program modification, on measuring educational growth in students. So I went to that session, and I listened to Stan and Phyllis. And then afterwards, Phyllis was went outside the room and was selling these little manuals for $5 a piece. And so I bought one of those, and that really changed my teaching, because what Stan really was trying to do, and this was quite a while ago, in the late 70s, was trying to measure the vital signs of educational growth. And so I started using his procedures, which he later refined into curriculum-based measurement. And that also got me started I met with Stan a few times and got interested in getting a PhD in special education. And so it's kind of like, I know Ann Turnbull the other day was talking about being in the right place at the right time. And that really was the case with me. Being a second-year teacher and hearing Stan talk about these important issues really changed the focus of what I was doing as a teacher. And when I decided eventually to go for my PhD, I worked with Stan at Minnesota and on progress monitoring and formative evaluation. And that has been very important to me. That's one of the important experiences I had that led to my scholarship in teaching and service. One of the things I think that was so interesting, it interested me right off the bat in talking with Stan, is that he said, one of the things we really lack in education are vital signs of educational growth. You go to a doctor, I went to a doctor a few years ago for a knee problem I was having, and what's the first thing the doctor does? Puts you on a scale, does your blood pressure, takes your heartbeat. Essentially, they're measuring the signs of physical growth, or your physical health, I should say. And what Stan was saying is we needed similar signs of educational health that we could use to monitor student progress. And that was what he then called database program modification, and now is called curriculum-based measurement. And that's been one of the, like I said, the great influences on my scholarship and teaching and service. One of the other ones is that when I was a student, a teacher, I was always very interested in the law. And so in my 12th year of teaching, I applied to the PhD program at the University of Minnesota in special education, and also applied to the law school, and was subsequently accepted into both. And then I had to decide what way I wanted to go, law or education. And after 12 years being in special ed, I really had a passion for that. And I had decided, well, I really am interested in the law, and I love to study about the law, but I don't think I'd want to be a lawyer or practice law. So I made the decision to go into special education, and my advisor was a fellow named Frank Wood, who was in the area of emotional behavioral disorders, and then Stan Dino. And so that really has been the two great influences on my scholarship and teaching. And again, it's just kind of serendipitous. I was just kind of in the right place at the right time.
I think it's really interesting how when you hear personal stories of where careers get started, how it never seems like you're in one direction. I don't think any of us are, that we know at the beginning where we're going to end up. I think it's really neat to hear those stories. I share your love of law. I did the same thing. I looked into law school before starting my PhD, and I said the same thing. I don't want to be a lawyer. I just want to help schools understand the law. So that's terrific.
Yeah.
So,
But that interest of mine led me to do a cognate or a minor in education law, which was fascinating to me. And I'm sure, as you know, the love of law is not universally shared by everybody. Many people find it to be rather dry and boring, but I found it to be fascinating. And it was actually through a doctoral seminar that was offered by a fellow named Bruce Balow at the University of Minnesota on legal issues in special education, which, interestingly enough, our textbook was the second edition of Rudd Turnbull's textbook. And I know you had talked to his wife, Anne, but the paper I wrote for that, the professor encouraged me to submit it. I submitted it to Exceptional Children. It wound up getting accepted, and that kind of got me started on kind of the whole law special ed thing, which I'd always really been fascinated in anyway. Interesting how those things work out.
It is very much so. So, in reflecting on your experiences in the field, what do you consider your greatest professional accomplishment?
Well, that's interesting. I would say probably a couple of things. When I was a doctoral student at the University of Minnesota, Stan asked me, because my advisor was actually Frank Wood, and he asked me if I'd be interested in working one of his grants. And of course, both Stan and I thought we definitely have to talk to Frank. And Frank, being so concerned about his students, said, I think this will be a better experience for you to work on a grant than continue supervising teacher programs. And so I went to work with Stan. One of the things we did in the final year was as part of one of his research grants, was to examine school districts that had successfully adopted curriculum-based measurement and school districts that did not, that had adopted it, but it had failed for whatever reason. And to try and determine what were the reasons for this innovation working as opposed to this innovation not working. And that was a very interesting piece. And one of the things it showed me was the absolute importance of educational administrators. Because one of the things we found is when there was strong administrative support, that it would work. But it took an administrator saying, this is the way we're going to do things in our district. And conversely, we found in districts that administrators said, you may do this, but you don't have to, it very seldom worked. So although there would be people who really had gotten into it and would use it as a whole, the district, if there was not a strong impetus from the district office or the principal to use a particular practice, it wouldn't be used. And so that led me to really look at the importance of educational administrators in terms of developing and implementing and maintaining innovations in schools. So that was a big thing. I was always very proud of the law textbook I wrote. It's now in its 4th edition. Interestingly enough, I actually approached an editor at Pearson, who was then Merrill, and it was the same editor that Ann Turnbull has. Ann Davis is her name, and talked to her about my ideas, and she helped. That's one of the great things about good editors, is they really help you shape your thoughts. And she helped me through the book. I started when I was still teaching, and it's now in its 4th edition. I've really enjoyed that, and I've gotten a lot of good feedback about that. A third thing I think has been a real professional accomplishment is in 2002, I wrote a grant for our state. At the time, the Office of Special Education Programs in the Office of Special Ed Programs, the Department of Education, sponsored what were called SIG grants, or State Improvement Grants. And so I collaborated with people here at the university and at the State Department in writing this grant. And what I did in it is the whole purpose of the grant really is to improve professional development and educational programs for youngsters with disabilities statewide. And we did really essentially 2 major things in the grant, one of which has really been successful and is still ongoing, and that is to bring school-wide positive behavior support into South Carolina. And we had a number of schools that we worked with, developing their PBIS systems. We've later found out that it wasn't enough to work with schools. You had to work with school districts to really make them successful. And that's been a great accomplishment. I think anytime we can make changes to the way kids are educated is a great accomplishment. And I think developing PBIS in the state has been really a really good thing. So I'm proud of that one. Those probably 3.
A bit of a theme that I don't know that you meant to make this a theme or not, but I'm noticing that everything you brought up talked about not only leadership, but mentorship and the importance of the people who helped you shape who you are and what you're doing now.
You know, and I don't know of many people who are very successful in our field that don't have those kind of experiences, that have found a mentor or have an advisor and have worked with them very closely. And our field is so strongly reliant on collaboration. I think that that's a very important thing we need to do as educators, is to find a body of really good folks we can collaborate with and we can learn from.
Okay, and Dr. Yo, it's Kathy Thomas checking in. One of our participants is curious about the response sometimes of administrators and teachers who are overwhelmed with additional requests for assessment, and also, you know, who may see the medical model as a more like outdated thinking with respect to special ed. So, like what is your thoughts on when you run into administrators or schools that have that kind of resistance, or maybe have some deficit thinking about progress monitoring, and
and that is a real problem. And of course, I know George Sugai, when he talks about bringing schools into the system, he is into positive behavior intervention supports to adopt that in a school. He essentially says, if you don't have 80% of the people on your side, it's probably not going to succeed. And I think we just have to try and convince people. One of the things we need to do, I think, that we can really help as teacher in preparing teachers is to prepare teachers who are good consumers of information, because our field is grows so rapidly. I mean, we're a very empirical oriented field, and there's always so many advancements. And I remember when I was first starting in my doctoral program, people would talk about the research practice gap back then, and we still talk about that. Unfortunately, we do oftentimes come up against real opposition. I know in doing PBIS statewide, we've had school administrators that said, we are doing too many things, we can't take on another. And I think then we need to do what Rob Horner referred to as trying to convince people to work smarter, not harder.
Yeah.
That we need to turn away from so many different things we're doing and just kind of, as they make the main thing the main thing. Focus on that we know works and try to bring people along through collaborative methods. And unfortunately, sometimes we can't.
Yeah, I think that, your focus on leadership and administration is critical, and also, how strong leaders foster sustainability is one of the things I'm hearing you say too. Thank you. I will click off, and then I will click back on with more questions. Thank you.
Okay. The one thing I did want to say too is I actually just had a meeting with my old state director of the PBI, of the SIG grant. We hired a person named Susan Thomas, who is a dynamic person in our state to bring this PBIS to the state, and is with many efforts. When you try to bring them scale, there's kind of a waxing and a waning. And for the last few years, we've been waning in terms of the number of school districts that are utilizing the system. And we've kind of come to the impression, at first we did it with schools, and we found out that wasn't enough. We had to do districts. And now we're really finding, if we really want to make change, we have to be political about it. We have to go through the State Department of Education, and that's oftentimes not enough either. We have to go through our politicians. And so there's so many ways to kind of approach those sorts of problems. And sometimes you just have to keep looking for the right way.
Yeah, it's Kathy again. I think, leading policy as opposed to following policy is a good thing. We also have a question. Out of all the things you said, Rob Horner, Dr. Horner talks about like focusing on the main thing, focusing on the big idea. So in your world, from your perspective, what is the main thing?
Well, I would say, because I'm in teacher preparation and other areas, but in terms of bringing change to the schools, I think if there's one thing we can do in teacher preparation, it's to produce good consumers of information. We need to be able to, like I said, our field grows so rapidly. Teachers, I know I was a teacher for many, many years. Teachers are very busy folks. We don't have time often to spend it like we in higher education do, reading journals. We sometimes don't even have time to do that, but reading research and things like that. So I think it's important that we produce teachers that are good consumers of information, that know how to access information. I think it's also important that with respect to higher education, statewide education, that we structure good professional development activities at the state level, at school district level, and the state level. I think one of the problems at the school district level is if people aren't good consumers of information, what you get is sometimes the latest fad or administrators glomming onto the glitziest piece of literature they get that looks good instead of really following research-based practices. And that's really our responsibility, I think, to prepare teachers and administrators, State Department folks that really understand the difference between research evidence-based practices and faddish practices. Just a little bit of story, and I think this is why one of the things that's so important in special education is there was actually a case, and I always kind of come back to the law, I guess. There was a case in the 1930s called in regards to T.J. Hooper. T.J. Hooper was not a person. T.J. Hooper was a tugboat. In the 1930s, large container ships and the like would be attached to a tugboat, and the tugboat would pull them into shore. But in the 1930s, in the early 30s, they really, although they had radio, they didn't use it as a common means of communicating with tugboats. And so the common practice was to relay weather signals from the shore to the tugboats. And then the tugboats would know if they could come in, if the port was clear or not. What happened in the case of the T.J. Hooper is the T.J. Hooper was a tug that was pulling in a large container ship into a port when a storm hit and badly damaged the container ship. And the owners sued the tugboat company, saying that this new invention, radio, if it had been used, would have prevented the T.J. Hooper from trying to tow them into the port. And they argued that the T.J. Hooper, the owners of T.J. Hooper, should have been using the state of the art. And the case actually turned on the question of the T.J. Hooper's responsibility, where they said that adherence to common practice was sufficient. The owners of the container ship said the situation demanded the use of state-of-art technology. And in fact, what the court did is they ruled when important matters are at stake, the legal obligation is to use state-of-the-art. And clearly, education of youngsters with disabilities is an important matter. And I think it's our obligation to use the state-of-the-art. And I think like teachers, like lawyers, like doctors, like engineers must consume and understanding the newest findings from research. Now, sometimes that doesn't mean reading the research, but it means structuring, preparing teachers that understand how to access research, and then preparing administrators to be able to do evidence-based professional development activity, and state personnel to do professional evidence-based professional development activities. One of the things I didn't mention this, but I'm real proud of in this state improvement grant is I wrote in what I at the time called research to practice, that at 3 points in our state, and that's the advantage of being in a small little state, is you can pretty much be anywhere in 2 hours, that we would have week-long what we called research to practice sessions, where teachers could go for no charge. They would be fed meals, and they could get renewal credits for their certification by taking courses. Many courses being 1 day long, up to 5 days long, and they would attend this research to practice conference for the entire week. And we invited people in who, people like Tim Landrum and a number of people who are really good in certain areas come in. And we've been doing this now since 2003. Fortunately, we only do it in the center of the state, Columbia, but it's, again, a small state. Everybody can be here no matter how far away you are in the state, 2.5 hours or so. And so this is one of the most successful things we do in the state. And it's really an excellent way to keep in practice or in service teachers up on the latest evidence-based practices in special education. So again, I think that's truly one of the most important things we do. It not only affects the students or the teachers that we prepare, but it affects the students with whom we teach.
Thank you, Dr. Yell. We appreciate you being so candid and telling us your personal experiences and how that relates to your expertise. So going off of that line, some researchers question the effectiveness of special education programs. How do you think the field has evolved, and what do you think are some areas of improvement?
Well, I think, this question has been around since I was first in my doctoral program. People question the effectiveness of special education programs. And no doubt there have been problems in special education. In my area of emotional behavioral disorders, in the early 90s, there was a very important study out of New York by Jane Nitzer and her colleagues, which she wrote into a book called Beyond the Classroom, Behind the Classroom Door or something. I can't remember, but she talked about so often our programs in educating youngsters with emotional behavioral disorders follow what she calls the curriculum of control. That is, we have point systems to award kids for being quiet, but very little emphasis on academic improvement, academic growth. And so I think those things do happen, and we as people who prepare teachers can do a lot, I think, to ameliorate those problems. But I think a lot of the problems in the effectiveness research has to do with measurement issues, that we now have measures like curriculum-based measurement, which I talked about before, which are incredibly sensitive to student growth. I mean, we can literally make decisions regarding a student's academic performance or monitor their progress and know if our education is working literally month by month or week by week. And I think a lot of especially the old effectiveness research was based on norm reference standardized tests that essentially give a percentile rank. And I don't think we're really very effective measures of student growth. So in other words, I think we need to address measurement issues, and I also think we need to consistently be working on improving teachers' ability to monitor students' progress, and then act upon that data. And if their programs are not working, to make educational changes. And to go back to what I said initially about when I first talked to Standino, we used a method in Minnesota, at least in my district, where we gave everyone a wide range achievement test at the beginning of the year, taught all year, and then gave them a post test using the wide range achievement test. Well, that didn't measure growth at all. We thought it did. So I think some of the newer methods that we use that are very sensitive to student growth really make a difference and can give us better answers as to how effective we really are.
So you've talked a little bit about kind of alluding to teacher preparation, in that teachers need to be better consumers of information, and that also one of the big issues is measurement of students with disabilities and growth. So what are your beliefs about teacher preparation, like the important issues and the evolution that will lead us towards those goals?
Well, that's the $100,000 question is, and I know everyone I know in teacher preparation, when their teachers they prepared go out in the field, they're very knowledgeable, they know evidence-based practices, and usually, you know, within 3 years or so, somehow that kind of falls off. And I think a lot of that has to do with teachers are just so incredibly busy, and so much of their time is taken through just through the day-to-day activities of teaching, that they really don't monitor progress like they should. They really don't write measurable annual goals in their IEP. Not that they don't want to, it's oftentimes they just don't know how to do it. And so I think we have to prepare teachers in a way like scientists, that they can collect data and make decisions based on that data regarding what they're going to teach, how they're going to teach, where they're going to teach. And then very importantly, I think it's vital that professional development activities be very rigorous and evidence-based throughout a teacher's career. I mean, we have to be lifelong learners because the nature of our field is that we know so much more than we did 5 years ago. And teachers, there just doesn't seem to be a good mechanism for keeping teachers abreast of these changes. And so then that comes back again to the importance of not only our teacher preparation programs, but professional development activities once teachers are in the field. That's my belief.
Yeah, I cannot agree more. I work with their first year teachers in a master's program, and I teach their special education class, and I hear a lot of, well, we learned about that, and we know it's a good practice, but at our school we do such and such. And so they're fighting against the culture that's already in the school. You know, they know what to do. It's just, can they break through that and actually implement those practices for their students?
Yeah.
So I completely agree that professional development is what is absolutely necessary to bridge that gap.
And it really can't be I think it has to be really, when you look back at No Child Left Behind, and there's a lot of problems with that law, one of the things it said is that professional development activities should be based on on research, basically. The ways we teach teachers, so often I think what passes for development is kind of the one-shot, good luck, God bless you, kind of dump truck approach to professional development, whereas we've known since Showers and Joyce in the 80s that really good professional development activities involved extended learning, coaching, things like that. And that's very important. But kind of as in preparing teachers, that's sort of out of our hands. And I know you can probably all agree with me, how many of you have had student teachers that come in and say, I know we're supposed to be doing this, and I see the teachers doing something wrong. Well, what can I do? And then they get a teaching job, and they say the same thing as you did, is that, well, I know the importance of using progress monitoring or PBIS, but we're using deep pressure, whatever faddish thing that the school is glommed onto. Unfortunately, that, so many things I think in schools are based on administrators kind of doing things that sound good, but really don't have any evidence behind them. And again, that comes down to a preparation question for them. When I look at higher education programs that prepare principals, I see a lot on finance, a lot on keeping the books balanced and those sorts of issues, but not as much on keeping teachers prepared to provide evidence-based practices by using evidence-based professional development activities. So we have to hit it in a number of different areas. if we're going to really expect improvement, I think, on a long-term basis and sustainability of evidence-based practices.
Well, Dr. Yell, when we think about preparing pre-service teachers and their training, and we're thinking about preparing special education teachers, what are the pros and cons of training them to be specialists in their special education category or special education generalists, which would be proficient in all categories?
That's a really interesting question. My area of emotional and behavioral disorders, I believe that teachers who work in that area just need some real thorough training in behavior support, conducting functional behavioral assessments. And I worry that the very general programs really don't impart that level of knowledge sometimes. And so now in our state, we have a categorical system. So if a teacher wants to work with youngsters with emotional behavioral disorders, they have to have a certification to work with youngsters with emotional behavioral disorders. Same with autism, early childhood special education. And so it's kind of the system I grew up with in Minnesota, and that's currently the system I'm in South Carolina. But I really believe that to really get in-depth knowledge in an area, I think is a better approach than just kind of a scattershot generalist approach, especially when we're talking about those real severe intractable disorders like severe emotional behavioral disorders.
I think a couple things that may affect that approach is retention of teachers. What about, their teaching force is already small if you're trying to get special education teachers. So I think maybe a lot of people go for a generalist type of cert or what have you so that they can get a job.
Yeah, well, I think, I'm familiar with, there's actually I don't know what in our state, there was a proposal to have a general certificate, which you can get, but for more severe disorders that present more problems, that an additional certification would be necessary. And we prepare teachers not at our school, but at other schools with a generalist certification, and they do fine. But I think for some disorders, more speciality is really sometimes needed.
Right. I agree. Well, if you could charge the future teacher educators, the doctoral students who are listening, and researchers a pressing issue to carry forward in their work, what would that be?
Well, I would say probably 4 things, I would guess.
Okay.
5 things. First thing is we have to be fluent in evidence-based practices. We have to, as folks who prepare teachers, we need to know what the evidence in our field says. We need to know the history of our fields, and we need to know how to access the latest information, and we need to impart that to our students. That if we truly want to make a difference in the lives of the students we teach as teachers, we need to be using evidence-based practices. Second, I would say collaboration. Our field is a highly collaborative field. As researchers, as persons who prepare teachers, we need to collaborate with others. I mean, when you look at Exceptional Children or Journal of Special Ed or some of the research-oriented journals, we don't see a lot of single-authored pieces of research, because in our field, it just requires that we're very applied, we're getting into schools. You need to depend on the participation of a number of people. And so articles are are written in that way. Research is conducted in that way. So I think collaboration is so important that we seek people to collaborate with. I would say also one of the things that was very important to me in my career in research was to find a mentor, was to, when I first began, to find someone who was really good at writing grants. Stan Dino was really good at formulating questions, and I mean, Stan Dino, when I came in, two of his students, Lynn and Doug Fuchs, were going out, and he was such an excellent mentor. And so sometimes I think we really need to seek out a mentor to help us early in our careers. I would say too, what was it, the old saying by Nike, just do it, that it's not enough just to sit around and think about writing or think about doing research. We have to do it. And if you want to write you want to try and write a grant, the chances of getting a grant are pretty close to zero if you don't write one. So we just have to do it. And when we do commit to doing something, we have to give 100% to it. Those, I think, are probably the things that have really guided me in my career. So depending on the evidence, looking to the evidence, collaborating with others, finding a mentor, just sitting down and working, doing it, and then committing when I find something I'm interested in. And again, that's very important. Find something that really you get caught up in, that really interests you. And when you do, you just commit yourself to it.
Okay. Well, when you reflect on all you've done and all you've learned in your career, what final words of wisdom would you offer future special education professionals?
I would say the same. I would give the same answer. I would say rely on the evidence, look at the evidence, collaborate with others, and really commit yourself. If it's to writing, if it's doing the research, if it's teacher preparation, if it's writing a chapter, commit yourself 100% to doing your best job you can.
Okay.
That would
Well,
be.
Well, thank you. We are just above 10 minutes left of the session. Do you have any final parting words, any words of any other advice, any charges, anything else you'd like to comment to us?
Beyond what I said, I would guess probably very important, whatever we choose to, if it's emotional disorders, if it's autism, whatever area that we're interested in, we need to know the history of our field. I think it's really important that we as a doctoral student, I thought that, well, I looked at I remember taking doctoral seminars from people like Bruce Balow and Maynard Reynolds, and how one of the things they would do is they would have us read the kind of the history of the field, the most important research in the field. And I think that's really important, that we really be well versed in special education and our speciality, whatever that is. And that may mean reading the 200 seminal pieces. But I think we need to know the history of our field to be able to recognize where we have to go. I also think, as someone who's always been interested in the law, is that it's very important we understand the law, but that we also understand that in a way that we're more like the eagles, in that we're trying to find the best evidence, produce the best results in our students, and the law is really about procedures. But if we're following evidence in teaching our students, in teaching teachers to teach students, I think we kind of go beyond the procedures, and really go to try to achieve excellence. And that's probably about it in terms of where I think we need to go. We just need to keep relying on the evidence, and to reiterate, I think we have to involve educational administration, and sometimes even the political individuals, to really make certain that change takes place.
Okay, and Dr. Yo, we have one more question come through the web chat, and it says, what do you foresee for the reauthorization of IDEA and ESEA?
Oh, interesting question.
Right now,
the ESEA is on tap first. That'll be reauthorized first, but I don't see that happening before the election. Although there is a version in the House, there is a version in the Senate, and I think the version in the Senate is the most likely, is going to be the final version. And I would encourage everybody, go on to the websites of the Department of Education. You can find that the Every Child, I think it's Every Child Achieves Act, they call it, or Lamar Alexander was the senator, was a senator in the Help Committee that did it. If you go onto his website, you can find the law. It's going to change a lot of things in ESEA, which nobody calls No Child Left Behind anymore. It doesn't do away with accountability, but it changes how schools can measure accountability, how states measure accountability. So that's going to happen next. I don't think there's any inkling of what's going to happen with IDEA right now, because I don't think there's a real super duper rush to get it done. A lot of people think, well, the law is working pretty well, let's just do ESEA first, and eventually we'll get to IDEA. So I would say, one of the things, and I didn't even mention this, but professional development activities, it's so important, I think, that teachers be involved with their professional organizations, like the Council for Exceptional Children. And by the way, they have a great website, and they have people on the Hill who are advocates on the Hill, lobbyists, and they're always a good source of information on what's happening with ESEA and ideas. So I would say go to their website and look at some of their blogs that they have. So the CEC is a good source to keep abreast of reauthorization information.
All right.
And actually, I wanted to say one more thing. And I wanted to just stress, I didn't mention this probably enough, that I think we have to encourage our teachers to become a member of a professional organization, such as CEC. I think they're great for networking. They have really good professional development activities. So I am a real advocate of that too.
Great, terrific. We're nearing the end of our time. I don't know, Dr. James, Dr. Thomas, if you have anything else to add at this point.
No, it's Kathy Thomas, and I just would say that I completely concur with you, Dr. Yell, on urging everyone to be a member of a professional organization, because it's a constant source of access to evidence-based practices, and those are those that we can, keep our learning alive and current. So it's I tell all of my pre-service teachers this. And I try and buy them in with the fact that most of the student memberships come with some kind of professional insurance, which is so good for them. So, but overall, I just want to make sure everybody knows that Dr. Yell's keynote at the TED conference in Phoenix, actually in Tempe, is on November 4th from 5 p.m. to 6:50 p.m. in Palm, ABCDE. So we hope we see everybody there, but this at least gave folks who can't attend access to talk to you and listen to you. And I want to thank Kathy Becht and Suzanne for managing all the technology. You guys did an amazing job in making this possible. And Jen and Ambra for coming up with great questions and moderating the discussion. And I also would like to sincerely thank everyone who took the time to attend. You guys are awesome. So, Dr. Yell, any final words? Jen or Ambra, any final words?
Well, if you wanted to share this discussion with your colleagues, by next week it's going to be posted on the Keynote Speaker Series website that was in the emails that you had received before. And if you weren't able to get to your questions, you think of something later, there's also that web chat on the Keynote Speaker Series website, so you can post questions as there too, and there as well too, and we'll do our best to get those answered. And you're also going to receive a brief questionnaire by email regarding this online discussion. So if you would help us at the Teacher Education Division, the Professional Development Committee, improve upon this professional development by responding to that questionnaire, it would really be appreciated. And we just want to, again, thank you, Dr. Yell, for taking the time and sharing your expertise with us, getting us remotivated again to start yet anew, I guess.
Well, thank you. And I would just want to say to all the researchers and doctoral students and teacher people in teacher preparation, it's important to get our students involved. I think it's also important that we be involved in our professional organizations, in CEC, in TAD. We need your help, and we're always looking for some good people to work to help us. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed this. Also, I will be constantly monitoring the chat, and so if there are any questions or queries, I'll be happy to answer them.
Terrific. Thank you so much.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Yell, and thank you, everybody. Good. All right.
Okay, thank you.
Care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.